and creating iron out of it. I said, so what kind of innovation? I mean, I try to get my children to think, what would you have had to see to think that you could actually do that? And then you had to construct an oven out of the resources around you. So they took termite mounds because they were already oxygenated because termites are constantly permeating the soil. So the air, so it was porous already. And so they used this, and then they used fluff, and then which is like dried straw. And they assembled this thing, and then they understood that they had to poke holes in it so that you would have this release of the gases at the top of it and everything. But to construct an oven that could melt rock is like off the chain, in my opinion. And so our ancestors were doing it all along the coast of Africa, all throughout Africa, thousands and thousands of years ago. So when you say that you have no technology in Africa or because you're black, it's ridiculous. But when I force my children to watch this video of how our ancestors did that, I said they melted a rock. Okay, can you believe that they could do that? And with what was around them, and so it was eco-friendly, and it wasn't emitting toxic fumes into the whole community so everybody could die. You know, they managed it and reused these ovens, and then created these tools, these farming tools, pots, all of these things that were now once they cooled. They were not easily broken. You could not just go and break an axe. So I said, look at all of the chemistry, the physics, the knowledge of geology that they had to have in order to do this. That is who we are, and that's who we are today. And so we need but our children need to understand what we were doing before they came here.
Yeah, because I think a lot of times our children don't understand that because, I'm even thinking about, like, the Great Pyramids, and, they might try to give it some explanation that it came from outer space or some other kind of, like, crazy explanation. But the truth of the matter is it was being built in Egypt and other parts of Africa and even other parts of the world that are definitely people of color. I'm thinking about the great things that have been constructed in, like, the Mayan area. They did some amazing irrigation things around the Mayan population for our native brothers and sisters and everything, but a lot of times we don't give these kind of credits, or we try to make it some form of a greater mythology, that some boogeyman somewhere came out there and made it happen. That it wasn't our folks and our mindset that created these things.
But you have to know who you are, and you have to understand the breadth of who you are. We're not just one-dimensional people where we just play sports and entertain and sing and dance and drum. We were, we established governments, we established scientific practices, medicinal practices. I was at the Rice Museum in Georgetown, South Carolina, in November, and one of the critiques of that process of growing rice was compared to the building of the pyramids. They said if you looked at the techniques and the ingenuity of these Africans who built these levees and created this rice culture, which made South Carolina, by the way, the second wealthiest state in the United States at that time. They said it was only comparable to the building of the pyramids. So we brought that technology over here with us when we through this transatlantic slave trade under the gun with no financial reward from it. Just imagine. I tell the kids, I say we should be Wakanda right now. In my opinion, integration really hinders our ability to achieve that level of technical savvy and intellectual accomplishment. It really hindered our community. And so what we need to do is go back, learn who we were, what we did, so we can understand that no one else can forge this future for us except us. We can do it, but we have to understand that we can do it.
Right. It's probably also understanding our history because a lot of people, I mean, I know, and I know you know, Dr. Noni, but a lot of the great builders of Durham itself were African American architects. I mean, one of the great architects was that also helped build the Duke campus was an African American architect. There was definitely a gentleman that helped build D.C. So there was a lot of these kind of folks that were famously known, but a lot of our kids, unfortunately, don't know these folks because our education system aren't teaching about these people.
I was just going to chime in and say that too, and that's the unfortunate part of everything. I felt like, you know, when I started to learn about like who I was and where I came from, it was because of the intentionality of like searching and like doing the digging and going back home and talking to people. But, you know, a lot of, again, like my generation at least, like we just rely on school to tell us what it is, and like that's the wrong thing to do because they're going to tell you the history that they want you to believe. They want you to, you know about. They're not going to tell you about how phenomenal like your people are. You know, they're never really going to put it in that light. So it's just like it's sad that our education system is set up that way, but you know, you really have to be intentional on digging and figuring out who you are, just kind of going back to what you guys were talking about as well.
I also think, sorry, this is Nadia here again. I also think that it's kind of it's up to us as well as a community. Again, I don't think that we should be looking to other cultures to tell us about us, like, you know, and I think sometimes that was the miss, like to your school or like, you know, just certain things. It's just like, I think us even having that expectation, you know, and I just feel like we don't even need to have that expectation that, because even if they did it, they're not going to do it right. We're not going to be pleased. We know us. We're going to be like, that ain't it. So I just feel like we just have to kind of take charge of how we want our story to be told, how we would like for our kids to know things. What do we want our black community to be remembered by? And I think that we really have to take it into our hands, you know, if we want to see, you know, I remember when the big thing was like, well, Disney's never done a black movie, and they did Princess and the Frog, and I just kind of felt like our black movies, like for our kids, need to be made by our black animators. We have black people who can draw. We have black people who can do comics. Like, we don't need to ask Disney to do a black movie for us. We need to be doing it for ourselves. And I just feel like when we start to kind of do that and just kind of take our own lead and be great and kind of go back to those, you know, ancestral, you know, things that we know our ancestors did and how strong they were, I just feel like we don't need a handout or a validation from anybody else. Like, we really need to start to do it on our own.
Yeah. I say to that.
Yeah, definitely. I can see that for sure. Desmond, you were talking about just some of the things that you learned as an entrepreneur. So I just want you to kind of like go further into some of the things that you've learned in your own development as an entrepreneur, some of the lessons that you've learned. You've shared some, but I'd like to hear if there's any others that you would like folks to know about that you've learned in the 10 years or so that you've been an entrepreneur. Or was your first entrepreneurial experience as a teenager? Because I know some folks actually became entrepreneurs when they were like teenagers or even young kids.
No, I wouldn't say I was an entrepreneur at that age because I didn't set up a business and monetize off of it. But I think one of the things that I figured out was my skill set that translates to how I'm able to do what I'm able to do as an entrepreneur now, which is like build relationships and really focus on value that you can give to others more so than like receiving from everybody else. And I feel like, again, the whole like energy and like the whole spiritual context is just really like defining your whole mentality or like your life off of like what you can do for others and like just understanding that it's going to come back to you, you know? I think some of the things that I've learned is, and I hone in on like resourcefulness a lot because I feel like a lot of people don't really, you know, kind of use their, honestly, like resources at hand. Their network. I feel like one of the things that I hear a lot is, you know, it comes from that whole corporate mentality of like, you know, going to the C-suite of, you know, whatever company in order to get your deal or to get your, you know, your way in or selling a concept. And I feel like as I've been able to, you know, matriculate over the past few years alone, I'm starting to see that, like, people that I went to college with or that I went to high school with are working for these companies nowadays, and honestly just leveraging them, you know, and networking with them and sharing ideas. Like, they're the ones that are sparking innovation. They're the ones that are bringing the ideas to the table that changes the whole paradigm for a Fortune 500 company. So I think that's something that, like, we don't do enough, is just, like, network and be resourceful laterally, more as far as, like, like up, top down or whatever. I'm sorry. So I think, like, those are some of the things that I'm figuring out. And then I feel like a lot of people, well, you know, I feel like one of the things that I've done and that was super successful is not limiting myself to one particular market. And I think that's one of the reasons why I was able to be successful with this crowdfund raise, is because I was going to events in Durham, in Raleigh, in Wilmington, in, you know, Winston-Salem, Greensboro, and I live in Charlotte, and I didn't have a job. But, like, I figured out a way to, like, connect to these markets, because you never know when those individuals in a different market can see what you see and potentially take your company from one aspect to another. And I feel like a lot more people need to be intentional on spreading their wings outside of Durham, spreading their wings outside of Charlotte. You know, and sometimes we just get limited because we're, again, resource constricted, but there's so many free events that are out there that I just went to in order to just build a network. And I feel like, again, just going to finding, like, what I was good at and what was going to get get attention from people is just, like, building these relationships. So those are just some of the things I could think off top that I was able to do, and I would love for more and more people to do as well.
Do you think that we do enough in terms of using things like Riot and Innovate Durham? I know that there were some other African American business owners, but I did not see a number of us at these kind of events. I know that a lot of people do definitely use Black Wall Street and some of their crowdsourcing, because that's a Black African American oriented kind of crowdsourcing opportunity. But things like Riot and Innovate Durham are not necessarily African American. I was just wondering, do you think that we use those enough in terms of actually trying to make our businesses aware and get the opportunities to go for it the way that you did?
We don't, and it's not our fault, I'll tell you that. So I feel like it was access to, like, so they're called, like, accelerators and incubators, and, like, you know, startup early stage companies that, you know, go through, like, business model, go-to-market strategies. They get tied with mentors and all this thing. Definitely superb, and a lot of the reason why I'm here today. But, you know, we don't, one, that's not taught in school, let alone, like, I came from an HBCU. I'm trying to get some of those ordeals and initiatives into my school now. Like, it's kind of been in, like, not to, like, play that whole petty game or, like, you know, feel sorry for me game, but it's been like a closed door to us for a long time, to where, like, they just weren't opening the doors for everybody, to be honest. And there was just structure around it. And that's why, like, the whole capital influx was just to these companies that would go through these accelerator companies, but you had to go to, like, an Ivy League school to go to these accelerators and, like, different things like that. And so, like, it was kind of made up for us not to win. But I think the more and more, like, people like me or people like that before me that just get, you know, hip to the game, it's just like, now I'm telling all my friends about it. You know, I'm telling all my network about it. And I'm seeing other people that look like me form these communities of co-working spaces and accelerators curated around, you know, African American people of color, you know, so that we can get the same type of opportunities. But I don't see enough of us using it, but I think a lot of it was systematically in place, like a lot of other things are, you know. But, you know, the more and more we get exposure to what we should do, I do see more and more people taking that chance of getting into these programs. But, you know, I think it's just like a part of the game and where the tech space is right now and where we are in the tech space as African Americans. We're not involved. Like, one of my biggest things to people nowadays is, like, think about your job 10, 15 years from now and, like, think about how automation is going to influence that. Like, I went to CES 2 weeks ago in Vegas, and it's the biggest, like, tech conference in the nation, and it's like robotics